Hello, everybody. My name is Talha Köse. I'm the director of SETA Brussels office, and I'm also professor of international relations at Istanbul University. So today we're going to talk about a significant issue, significant topic. So every year during the month of September, we have the meetings of United Nations General Assembly, and the world leaders come together at New York and discuss the contemporary issues and many other challenges that the world faces at that time. Of course, one of the significant issues, discussions is related to United Nations reform agenda. So this reform agenda has been on the agenda for almost 2-3 decades. There are expectations about change. So there are successes and failures of United Nations. I mean, United Nations came after the World War II, where there was a chaotic environment and restored some form of order. There are some successes of United Nations, prevented a nuclear war, and played a significant role in addressing some of the great power conflicts. However, there are certain weaknesses in the regional context, and there are emerging agenda items. So in terms of inclusivity, in terms of new agenda items, in terms of the new changing power balance in the world politics, the current structure, current situation in United Nations does not necessarily represent the existing context. So today we're going to discuss this issue, the debates about United Nations reform, with 5 very significant contributors. They will discuss both the general items about the United Nations, as well as regional perspectives and expectations about the United Nations reform agenda. So we have Professor Murat Yeşiltaş, the director of SETA's foreign policy chapter. And also he's a professor at Ankara Social Sciences University. We have Aylin Ünver from Haliç University. We have Elsadig Elfaqih from ORSAM Sakarya University. We have Nazmul from Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University, and Ariel González Levaggi from Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina. So we're going to discuss these issues. So in the first round, I'm going to ask the more specific questions. I'm going to start with Professor Yeşiltaş. So, Murat, there is an existing change. There is a change in the balance of powers and geopolitical transformation, and of course, like every change, the structures that try to normalize, try to balance the world politics, United Nations is affected. So how do you see this changing geopolitics, changing balance of powers affect United Nations functioning, and what are the expectations related to this change?
Thank you, Talha. First of all, I would like to also thank you for inviting me to this important and timely panel. And this is timely because this week many leaders from different countries will talk about the issues of global politics, and they will probably highlight the necessity of reforming United Nations. But your starting point is also important because you mentioned about the changing dynamics of international politics and the geopolitical transformation of international system, especially since the end of the Cold War, but particularly we have been witnessing significant transformation in international system since 2020 with the Corona-19 or the global pandemic. So we need to really focus on the global geopolitical transformation, because when we look at the different narratives concerning the reforming agenda of United Nations, the institutional perspective is really dominant. The scholars and the policymakers usually ask the question about United Nations: how we should reform the United Nations from an institutional perspective. But I strongly believe that we first of all make an analysis concerning the geopolitical transformation of international system, and try to understand how we are gonna reform United Nations. But when we look at the geopolitical dynamics, because the dynamics are really important, are dominant, and we have to understand the complexities of the United Nations in terms of its response to the transformation of international system. I would like to highlight a couple of points concerning the transformation by taking especially into consideration the transformation of international system since the end of the Cold War, because we are still witnessing the consequences of the post-Cold War era international politics and its effects on the United Nations effectiveness, especially the effectiveness. So I think the main problem is about the issue of the American-led international order. The American central liberal order, I think, has failed in many respects, and none of the post-Cold War strategic assessments and expectations in world politics have been realized. This is the main problem. Contrary to expectations and the strategic assessments of the United States, the international distribution of power changed, as you mentioned. The global democratic norms in the global level declined, and the global power competition, I think, intensified, especially when we look at the recent developments between United States and China. We can easily understand how global power competition intensified in terms of its effect on the international system. In the post-Cold War era, American foreign policy, which assumed, of course, the responsibility of the maintenance of the liberal world order, was designed on three major strategic assessments or assumptions. There were three strategic assessments in the United States strategic community with regards to transformation of post-Cold War international politics. The first was the, I think, assumption of period of democratic deepening and expansion as liberal values trumped in the post-Cold War era. As you remember, the democratic agenda was dominant in the United States foreign policy, especially under the first Bush administration, then Clinton administration. And under the Clinton administration, the United States foreign policy basically focused on democratic enlargement, formulating the United States grand strategy to preserve American primacy. And of course, it also aimed to prevent the rise of alternative power center. I think this democratic assessment in terms of the international system will become more democratic, and the number of countries will be increased in terms of their political structure, and we will, at the end of the day, reach a liberal democratic international order. I think this, first of all, failed because we have been witnessing the decline of democracy, not only in terms of the non-Western world, but also the democracy has been declining in the Western world. I'm not talking about the democracy in terms of election, but a democracy in terms of the inclusive nature of democratic society. So we have been witnessing the rise of right-wing political narratives and the right-wing radical parties in different European countries. When we look at the globe in terms of the rise of and decline of democracy dynamic from Latin America to the East Asia, we have been witnessing the rise of populism and nationalism as the main political structure. So therefore, I think this decline of democracy is one of the important driving factors behind the international legitimacy crisis in international politics. The second one, as a strategic assumption in the United States, was about the liberal economy. According to a strategic assessment, the liberal economy will especially extend its sphere of influence, which will ultimately shape the very nature of political culture of non-democratic countries. Of course, the main idea behind this strategic assessment was the rise of China and other so-called non-democratic countries. And we have been witnessing the rise of alternative economic center, and the center of the international trade has been shifting from west to the east. But unfortunately, the idea of liberal economic zone didn't bring any domestic transformation, especially in China or other countries. So this is the main liberal idea behind the United States strategic assessment. I think the number 3 is about the return of great power politics. This is one of the important ramifications of the transformation of international system in terms of understanding the transformation. At the end of the Cold War, the main idea was the unipolarity, the emergence of unipolarity, in which the United States was at the center. But on the other hand, the United States basically tried to prevent the rise of alternative power center against its unipolar international system. But when we look at the transformation in different eras, especially after 2000, we have been witnessing the rise of China and other rising powers, and they are trying to also relocate their position, and they also have been recalibrating their military power, economic power, and now they want to more acute, relations with the other countries in the Western world. This is, the one of the important ramifications of the transformation of international system. And when we look at the different countries' national strategy or security strategy document, most of them are talking about and highlighting mainly the return of great power politics. We have also seen this kind of a return of great power politics in the context of China, United States global competition. We have been also witnessing a new alliance system and emerging alliance system in different regions. Contrary to the internalization of the international politics, we have been witnessing the new regionalization. As you remember, we saw this the new trends in BRICS, and last week, as you remember, we saw in this new regionalization as in the form of the establishment of India, Arab, European corridor. So as a result, there is an emerging international system. Of course, this is not unipolar, this is a multipolar. And in this multipolar system, there are different countries which are trying to reach their strategic autonomy. We are also witnessing the emergence of new international security architecture. And there are different security issues, including climate change, environmental issues, and many different type of issues. So under the shadow of the transformation of international system with the new characteristic features, United Nations is trying to respond to these developments and changes. But of course, United Nations has also failed in terms of adapt itself into the new developments in international system. So there has been many debates concerning the reform agenda of United Nations, but there was no serious discussion in terms of reforming United Nations. At the end of the day, we have legitimacy crisis of United Nations because United Nations cannot responding to global issues such as refugee problems, climate change. There is a lack of representation problem within the structure of United Nations Security Council, and there is also a problem of effectiveness of United Nations in responding the crisis. So therefore, it is crystal clear that United Nations should be reformed. But the question is how we should reform the United States and where we can start to reforming United Nations. More importantly, I think there is an existential problem about the reforming United Nations is about that whether the great powers really want to reform United Nations without their willingness. Is it really possible to reform the United Nations? I think the main problem is about that.
I'm going to take this question to Professor Aylin Ünver. So Murat mentioned some weaknesses of the existing system that came lately. So the fundamental weaknesses related to legitimacy, weakness related to representation, and weakness related to some normative foundations has been questioned, like democracy and economy. So what is your take on, Professor Noy? I mean, do you think the leading countries, especially the Western countries, who established this order after the World War II, so are they ready to accommodate changes, or are they gonna continue with this system, or what are their perspective on this? Can you comment on that?
Okay, thank you for asking this question, and also I'd like to thank SETA for inviting me to this panel. Yes, we all started again to talk about the need to make a reform on the United Nations Security Council after the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But this is not a new topic, by the way, because as you mentioned that it was established right after the Second World War, but it was not also the first experience, because previously the League of Nations was formed with the same intention to ensure and maintain the international peace and security. It was established right after the First World War. It failed. And it couldn't prevent the emergence of Second World War, but it was used as a template for the establishment of the United Nations. Both has the same actually aim, and also the United Nations in particularly was established as a part of the rule-based international order. When it was also established by the victorious state of the Second World War and reflected their expectations. But now, when we look at the picture, it doesn't reflect the current global dynamics because of the representation problem. The Latin American countries and African countries are absent in this representation. And also the other problem that emerged right after the Cold War, because the end of the Cold War created kind of an optimism with regards to United Nations and its fulfillment of its obligations arising from the United Nations Charter. But this optimism faded away because it couldn't fulfill its functions properly. In the 1990s, ethnic conflicts emerged and the new wars emerged in the Balkans, in Caucasia, as you remember. So the United Nations again failed. That's why the new reform efforts also emerged in the 1992 first by the creation of a workshop on this issue. And then in 2008, another case, the Georgian War, also led for search for a reform process within the United Nations Security Council structure. But member states remain divided over the shape of any reform since then. couldn't agree on what kind of reform they need. Actually, it's clear, crystal clear, because of the veto power the 5 permanent member state has. They blocks the entire system. They cannot, any resolution cannot pass if one of the 5 permanent members can use the veto power to block the passage of this resolution. So recently we have witnessed this in the war in Ukraine, and previously we also witnessed different kind of disagreements between the permanent member states, even the transatlantic alliance. For instance, when the United States' second war in Iraq in 2003, France was quite opposed to the unilateral preemptive strike of United States on Iraq. So this was the case in previously, and there were also some efforts to make any reform on the United Security Council structure. But member states remained divided over what kind of reform process they would like to have. But this doesn't mean that United Nations couldn't, achieve some successes. Despite these agreements among the United Nations Security Council permanent members, somehow they fulfill its functions and also authorize the peace operations in some conflict areas. There was a kind of compartmentalization of relationship that helped the United Security Council to fulfill at least its functions. But after the war in Ukraine, we are witnessing quite a strange period, because it further deepened the East-West tension. And also the division in the world threatens to the United Nations this ability. This is very alarming and also very risky, because we should not wait for another world war to reform the United Nations Security Council structure to make it a functioning international organization. So again, for that reason, there is urgent need to make a reform in the UN Security Council. When you ask me about is this possible in this current circumstances, actually there is an article in the Charter, United Nations Charter, Article 108 and 109, allows the member states to make any amendments on the United Nations Charter. But there are some conditions, especially there is need to have the consent of all permanent member states consent. So and their willingness to make such an reform and to make such amendments is so important. And they need to have a kind of an agreement on specific issues to make all those amendments. But it's not an easy task to do. But in order for the survival of the United Nations, at the same time, this is vital. I would like to give an example of NATO. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the collapse of communism, NATO survived. How it survived? Because it transformed itself to the new realities. So it changed its, security architecture, and also its let's say, its charter, and also continue to survive. For the United Nations, we need to see the same process. Otherwise, it's doomed to fail, like its predecessor, League of Nations. And also, this is not an easy task to do, by the way, because especially the permanent member states who has the veto power are not willingness to quit their veto power, or to make some limitations on this power, it will be the difficult one. And also with regards to enlargement or the expansion of the United Nations Security Council, its permanent members or its elected member states, also will not be the easy task to do, because each member state has its own agenda, national agenda. And for instance, Indian membership at the UN Security Council as the permanent member would be maybe will not be supported by China. So it's difficult to convince all the member states in the UN Security Council permanent members to agree on the same structure. So they have each of them different agendas, different national interests. So it's really difficult to convince them, and without the consent of them, it's really difficult to make those amendments in the UN Charter to make it again a functioning international organizations. But at the same time, states cannot handle the global challenges, because the global challenges requires the global reply. And even the strong, militarily and economically strong states cannot cope with these challenges alone. And at the end of the day, they need the international organizations to deal with those challenges. So, and I'm optimistic about at the end of the day, they will find a way to cope with this problem, overcome this problem, and to speed up this reform process, because there are some urgent cases waiting for urgent actually the responses, like climate change and its the threat multiplier effects in the world. Is also requires some urgent global reply. So these conflicts, wars, and the dysfunction of the United Nations Security Council also has an indirect negative impact on these challenges, and there's at least to cope with those challenges. I'll stop here.
Of League of Nations is important. You know, that's one of the failures of the League of Nations was, you know, failure of the major great powers to get integrated. However, you know, that led to weaknesses in the United Nations. So now, yes, I mean, the great powers are the members. However, they block some of the major changes in United Nations system. So, as you mentioned, one of the problems with regard to reform is disagreement or lack of agreement on the nature of change. So I'm gonna now turn to Professor Elsadig Elfaqih. As you know, when we look at the Security Council, this is like the glass half, you know, empty. However, when we look at the other functions of the United Nations, I think there are so many examples that would demonstrate that United Nations makes some major contributions. So coming from the MENA region, what is your take on the United Nations? What are the successes and failures of United Nations? And under these circumstances, do you think that, you know, this is sufficient to keep organization or put more emphasis, more energy, more investment on this organization? Says Mike, I think we have to.
First of all, thank you so much, Professor Talha, for your introduction, and also my thanks go to SETA for bringing us once more to this very important topic of the United Nations. I think the questions you introduced at the beginning about the global powers, and MENA region comes a second, but it's okay. MENA region has its own problems. This is why it complicates things for the United Nations itself. United Nations, as you said, it has so many failures in the region because, especially when we look into the MENA region, because the MENA region is not really an independent geographical or geopolitical entity. It is part of the larger Middle East, and also it is part of Africa. And both regions, they have a multitude of problems that the United Nations has to deal with these problems for quite some times, with some successes and lots of failures. Lots of failures in the Middle East conflict, which the MENA region has always been part of it, part and parcel of the conflict in the Middle East, in which the United Nations always involved positively and negatively. And also the issues of the African continent, in which MENA region also is an integral part. MENA region has its own peculiarity, as I said. It is part of the Africa Union as an organization, part of the United Nations system, and also it is part of the Arab League, which is also part of the United Nations system. And there is a lot of overlaps. Even in the United Nations bodies like ESCWA, which is the Economic Council for West Asia, in which all of North Africa or MENA region is party to it, especially North Africa, and also the North African region is part of the Economic Council of Africa. So they are part, even in the same level of functions of the United Nations, they are party to these organizations and the other. So the MENA region is the most affected region by the United Nations decisions, especially the Security Council. We saw the Security Council very active in so many global issues. But when it comes to the MENA region and the Middle East, especially the Arab-Israeli conflict, it is always inept, never really taken a considerable position or stance to help solving the outstanding issue of this prolonged conflict, which is actually, it is almost the age of the United Nations nation itself. And this has come out of the disagreement between the Big Five. The Big Five always have different views in the past and in the present, in the conflict, and in all the conflicts of the MENA region, not only the Israeli-Arab conflict, but all the conflicts of the MENA region. The Big Five always differ when it comes to the issues of this region. It has been mentioned by Professor Murat at the beginning, and lots of talk has been said about the United States as the major power from the start, and it continued to be the major power, especially when it comes to the United Nations and the Security Council as a host of the United Nations, and also the biggest single contributor of the United Nations budget. And this budget, especially through different kind of agencies, affected the work of the United Nations, particularly in the MENA region, because all the times that United Nations or the United States threaten to withdraw or to pull out of the United Nations, this agency or the other, is because of issues related to the Middle East or to the MENA region, North Africa and the Middle East. Since the time of the UNESCO until recently, the World Health Organizations. So whenever there is a real or a serious talk about the issues of this region, whether it is security through the Security Council, or other issues related to health or education or science or what have you, the United Nations, the United States affected the role and the work of the United Nations in the MENA region. And the MENA region itself is so divided in so many issues. This is why this division is taken or used against the interest of the people of the MENA region by different global powers. Many vetoes have been exploited for issues related to the MENA region. So many meetings, or the vast majority of meetings of the Security Council related to the issues of the MENA region. Almost 70% of the decision taken by the Security Council is related to the MENA region. So the MENA region has always been a focal point of the work of the United Nations, and especially the Security Council. In terms of reform, the Arab League and the Africa Union has always been calling for the reform of the United Nations. I was an ambassador to the Africa Union for some time, and whenever we had a summit, whenever we had a Council of Ministers meeting, there is always a call for reform of the United Nations. Not only the reform of the Security Council, but the reforms of other works of the United Nations. Africa Union declared, for example, including North Africa, which is part of the MENA region, declared 2020 as silencing the gun flag program for the Africa Union, and they worked diligently to realize that. But unfortunately, the competitions of the Big Five, who supposed to guard the security of the international or the global security, including the African and North African security, were perpetuated much of the conflict which affected especially North Africa as part of the MENA region. The Sahel country, France, were very active in creating lots of problems, and now we witness many military coups because of the interventions of the French, because of the greed of the United States to find more bases for its military, because of the Russian Wagner group, because of the Blackwater, because of all the interventions of the same superpowers who are supposed to be the guardian, the protector of peace in the region. So the MENA region and North Africa region affected tremendously by what is going on in the Sahel region, which is just in their back door. Lots of immigration, lots of chaos, lots of also arms, availability of arms in the hands of many opposition groups in the region, are because of the lack of leadership of the Security Council, or inactive role of the United Nations, especially the Security Council, and the wrongdoings of the superpower in the region. Yes, the reform has created a momentum now. It started as far as officially or institutionally, it started as far as 2004, when the late Kofi Annan called for the reform of the United Nations, but it was immediately killed. 2005, nobody was talking about the reform of the United Nations because of the United States of America and because of the other political or superpowers party to the Security Council at the time. One point I would like also to clarify and to keep in mind: when we talk about the United States as a superpower, we should put in our minds that there is no one United States when it comes to the United Nations. The Republicans, when they assume power, they look at the United Nations as a debating society, irrelevant to their global outlook, to their global activity. And they always call for withdrawal from the most important service agencies, like the UNESCO, the health organizations, and other organizations, and they also stop paying their dues to the United Nations. They make it ineffective, not only in terms of guarding the security of the international or different regions, but also the services that the United Nations decided to do through different agencies. So there is two different United States when it comes to the United Nations, and even when it comes to the Security Council. Recently, Biden, for the first time, American president, called for the reform of the United Nations. How long this call will take to end or to be effective, God knows. But it has been taken on, or also encourage the 77 plus China meeting, which has taken place just recently, which also called for the reform of the United Nations, including the Security Council, or mainly the Security Council. Yes.
I'm gonna, yeah, thank you for this, especially giving the perspective from the MENA region and also great power perspective. So I'm gonna now move to, Nazmul Islam. About, Nazmul, why would the new generation care about United Nations? And what are the strengths and weaknesses? I mean, do the generation expect this organization to address their problems? Is it still relevant? And why should they care? What is your take on this issue?
Thank you so much, Professor. Indeed, we are talking very important issues. I think my daughter, she's trying to also speak.
So new generation's response
yeah,
to the change.
She just want to put her speech. Anyway, indeed, I mean, United Nations, I mean, strengthening, maybe we can start with that way. I mean, why we need United Nations, successful United Nations, because we need to ensure a peaceful world for our next generation, even not for us, maybe for our next generation, also for us. So anyway, let's start with a really warm thanks to SETA and also the team who organized this timely meeting. Actually, it was last year we talked about the reform system and also UN and these important issues like what would be the way we can reform the UN and what is the option. So within the year, if we look back, like what was happened, to me, we can add more failures rather than successes. So it's, of course, I mean, from an individual perspective, I mean, rather than in academic and scholarly talks, it's unfortunately, we can say, it's a sad thing to see such a failed way the UN dealing with the many problems in the world, especially in the Asia and in the Pacific region. So let's come to the point, as Professor, you asked me about the new generation and the success and let's say the failures. The first thing we have to look actually the main 5 areas of UN that they are working. So we have to look like, okay, what they said and what is going on in there. For example, like we almost all knows very well, I mean, UN try to establish and maintain and ensure international peace and security. And this is a really, I mean, whether we want or not, this is the one of the big bubble. I mean, what kind of international peace and security? Let's say, I mean, UN annually, it expends nearly $3.22 billion in a last year calculation. And for the next year, they're planning, let's say, $3.4 billion. So the question is here, even, I mean, if there is no UN, then this money can invest at least more than 50 countries in a very, very well way. I mean, without even UN. So now come up again the question. So why we need UN? Because UN told us they will ensure peace and security. But what we have seen so far, I mean, almost all of the major conflicts, the UN, they, I mean, directly or indirectly, they fail to do and to offer some peaceful resolution. I mean, we can say like, I mean, it started from the Asia, Southeast Asia and South Asian region. I mean, it can be Arakan problem, or it can be Afghanistan crisis, or Kashmir crisis, Uyghur problem. I mean, anything what we can say. It's very difficult. I mean, we can find out the way they say like international peace and security, and what kind of peace and security they are trying to tell. And the second is the protecting human rights. I mean, that's also another issues. The way UN is trying to establish the human rights, and the way we are seeing the human rights in the world, especially human rights for whom? I mean, of course, in this point, basically, I mean, we may see some positive things, some successful things of the UN, because, or probably, if there is no UN, we may see the much more disaster of human rights in the world, especially in a many democratic countries context, because UN, they really don't have that capacity to interfere in which country the countries who are not democratic. So basically, they have a good role in a democratic countries to make a positive role inside that country's political system. So in that way, we can see that, I mean, there is still a positive things and its strength of the UN to do and to ensure and to protect human rights. And the third thing is the delivering humanitarian aid. I mean, it is one of the package that we have seen when we are talking UN. The whole system of the UN, it looks like it is working for humanitarian aid, but it should not to be like that way. I still remember, I mean, one of my project, it was basically for Arakan issues, and we met many UN country representatives, especially even UN means UN organs, let's say UNHCR, and then WFP, UNICEF, UN, I mean, the organization who are somehow worked with UN or directly involved with UN. So what we have seen, the most of the organizations, let's take example like say Arakan, they are working for only humanitarian aid. That's the important thing. Of course, UN should do this. That's a really, really good works. But the problem is here, they just make their whole works based on humanitarian aid. I mean, it should not be like that, because the UN, the main focus should be on political works. I mean, protecting the political rights of every countries or citizens or community, or even the ethnic people like this Arakan people, let's say. But UN, they failed in there. Even also, they don't have any kind of policy to talk about such kind of stuff. Let's say like, what would be the solution for resolving conflict which are existing, even the examples I already talked, like Afghanistan or Arakan or SOSA. So now come here, I mean, the way UN is working, it looks like they're working like a humanitarian organizations or something like a civil organizations. But it is much more big. I mean, the states, the peoples, even the I mean, global citizens, they are expecting more from the UN, because I mean, we have already just, I mean, also professors Murat Hojam and also the Professor Aylin Hojam also talked about that issue, especially let's take a League of Nations, why they failed. I mean, one of the biggest reason it was the political failures. I mean, like they were failed to stop military aggression. So let's come to the here, I mean, to current scenario. What UN is missing? I mean, if we look to the UN missing point, let's take a Asia and Indo-Pacific region. I mean, we will see a very big absence of UN to talk about the current scenario in UN in Asia Pacific region. Let's say talk about the AUKUS. Let's talk about the Quad. Let's talk about the even also Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. What is the UN's standpoint? I mean, are they really integrating with them? Are they really supporting them? Or are they really talking against this kind of initiative? Because it's all about a new security framework in the region, and it shows like in future it will create a problem in the region. I mean, it's very crystal clear. I mean, it's very open. I mean, everybody who are working on the region, they knows the way US or the way big power they're working there, and the way even also the let's say like, okay, the anti-establishment or anti world order, or who are trying to do new world order, they have a new motives. I mean, let's say like, okay, UN, I don't know, like I never see anything. Let's say like, okay, Russia and North Korea, they sit together just a couple of days ago, I mean weeks ago, and also Russia is trying to do something in there. They're only still talking the Russian-Ukraine crisis, talking about the humanitarian aid, talking about the refugees issues. That's also important. That's really need to talk. But the most important things, they are not serving, they are not offering a new offer like political resolution or security resolution. That's most important that we are seeing. UN is not working, or sometimes they're working, it's just a statement based. So that's the important thing, that what I understand, like when we're talking the strength and weakness. I mean, between the strength and weakness, the missing point in here, they are really missing the new development in the region. They are not integrating even also with the powers, let's say like the powers which who have most power or major powers in UN system. I mean, we can say the veto powers or security, the members of the Security Council, whoever it is, they are really missing those points. They are not integrated with those countries. They're not addressing the issues and to integrate, like, okay, how we can deal with such kind of new developments. And let's come to the other point. When we're talking the fourth point, I mean, fourth point, let's say like the climate action or development to deal with the climate crisis or environmental issues. In that sense, we can see the UN, they are really very success to address the issues to all over the world. Of course, there is also many things we can criticize, but in this point, we have seen at least UN successfully address this issue. Even also like the in a recent time, China also trying to do something to protect the climate crisis, or also to address the environmental issues. That's, I think, good side of the UN, because UN took this kind of initiative to address and to reach to those countries even who are not existing with the reforming, let's say like democratic reforming system of the UN. So that's the one of the good point of the UN. And then the last point that the UN is trying to establish, to tell like, okay, we want to uphold international law. And I think in that case, UN is completely failed, because I mean, it is very clear, if any countries, whatever it is, country A or B or C, if they have a power, they can do anything but according to their capacity of the power. For example, let's say like when we are talking about the hegemony, we are normally looking three tools: political capacity, military capacity, or economic capacity. And it is very clear in a world's persistence, or also world's current existence, any country, they have a ratio of the power in compare with the major power. Let's say if we talk the power of transition theory, let's say like if any power, if they have a 70 or 80% power to compare with the exist power, they are making their own policy. For example, we have seen in South Asia, India, yeah, it's a good side that India is now growing. I mean, they are contributing in the world power, but the problem is they are not also integrating with UN system. And in that way, they are trying to make their own policy, and that gives them huge rights. For example, they just withdraw law which were existed in Kashmir, for example. And also let's come to even the small countries, Myanmar. I mean, for them, it is also give a huge chance, which opportunity to do not care the international law. I mean, of course, like they have their current scenario, but in the case of Arakan or Rohingya people, it is very clear they really don't care international law because of not their country's power, because of the UN's failures. Because UN, they really did not justify and did not offer the real solutions to address this kind of crisis and to make and find out the solution, okay, in what way we can establish international law in there. And also, even also like any other countries, forget about the exist major powers like China or also other countries, even these kind of middle powers, or let's say like the countries who are trying to do, going to be emerging power, or let's say like major powers, almost every country, they are trying to do their own policy, their own legal actions. And that's not good for the UN, because we already talk about the issues of the history, like during the Cold War time and before the Second World War time, it was actually the issues that makes big conflict. And in a way, I can just come up with this point. I mean, the last point that I can conclude here. UN, they some way did not address the pre-conflict prevention measurement. They are somehow quite successful in terms of post-conflict, or we can say like in terms of peace building after the conflict. So they are somehow, they have a good success in there. Let's say if there is some conflict, they're just trying to go there and give some kind of humanitarian aid, giving some kind of, or addressing some kind of stops, which looks like, okay, you are doing something, but they are completely failed before starting this kind of conflict. And again, we have seen this kind of new regional dynamics, like in Asia and in the Pacific region, and the way UN is missing though to address such kind of problems. It looks like, okay, there will have a new conflict in the region and UN will be again unsuccessful in there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, a little bit pessimistic picture when you look from the perspective and the region where you focus, unfortunately, and some of the failures are mentioned. However, we still don't have much of an option to address common shared issues such as the environment, global warming, food, and all other issues actually that is relevant, including the human rights. I mean, we don't have an alternative venue to discuss these issues. So my questions to Ariel. So Ariel, what is your take on? I mean, can we reach, address these challenges with a reformed UN, or what are the challenges? What are the tools? Of course, one of the presumptions was related to rules-based international order when we talk about United Nations, and I think it would be too long to wait for such an order to address pressing issues like hunger, environment, and so what is your take on, I mean, what is the right way to address these things? And do you think United Nations can still play a very significant role in this transformation? Or should we institutionalize, or should we work on alternative mechanisms to address these challenges?
Thank you, Dr. Köse and SETA, for the invitation for that very interesting webinar, and also congratulations about the launching of the book on UN reform. That's a very challenging questions. I think we are going through very interesting times in which the challenges are so high, are so relevant for the future of the humankind, that the UN nations are in a position that at the moment, and with the current structures that are that were created after the Second World War, are not suitable to address that problems that are related to poverty, to inequality, to, of course, the impact of humans on the nature, the global warming, etc. So I think right now we are in what I will call time of great diversions, especially in the high strategic agenda. Dr. Yeşiltaş was very clear about that we are living through increasing competition among great powers, and that affects the main goal of the UN nations since the creation was the maintenance of peace and global security. So the split within the United Nations Security Council between the West and Russia, and also China with a more balance, but still more closer to China, to the Russian agenda, among the five permanence of the United Nations Security Council says a lot about what is going on about managing regional security challenges. So this fragmentation is maybe not the fault of the United Nations as a whole, but it's a reflection of the different perspective, different global views, world views of the West in relation to China, in relation to Russia, in relation with a group of emerging powers like India and Brazil, South Africa, for example, that gathered last month in the last BRICS, now BRICS Plus summit in Johannesburg, and like offer a different perspective of politics. So even offering an expansion of their own select club to a group of emerging powers from Ethiopia to Emirates to Argentina. So in what sense, I would say the core of the goals of the United Nations, that is to maintain peace, to maintain security in global affairs, is being directly challenging, and I think that right now the General Secretary and the leadership of the United Nations are not happy with what is happening. Of course, they have a secondary role in trying to avoid the Russian-Ukrainian war, even if in the aftermath they can handle with Turkey to arrange the Black Sea grain initiative. But still, it's not enough. It's not enough because armed conflicts, both interstate and civil conflicts, are rising. And I think this is not new. So, and Turkey has been witnessing in their own neighborhood how complicated was the years after the Arab Spring. United Nations were something that was a tool that doesn't work to stop, for example, civil wars in Syria or in Yemen. And on the contrary, for example, in Libya, even if they establish a no-fly zone, the Libyan post-Arab Spring has been a land of chaos and civil war. So I think that's very important as a fair point. In strategic issues, there is at times of a great divergence, and the United Nations are failing the core. But on there is a great convergence on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, but especially in the global south. So still there is a split between the global south and the north that remains about the developmental goals, because they have two different approaches. The north is pushing, for example, for a renewable energy agenda, but the global south countries, and many of them, especially in Africa and Latin America, don't have enough funds to cover. And for the other side, the north countries, like European, for example, they are putting some kind of ambientalism norms that remains from kind of a different kind of protectionism. So in that sense, I think the 2030 agenda is critical for the development of the global south, but still remains needs more commitment from the global north to address common issues of the humankind.
these overall assessments, so all presenters. Now I'm going to ask the quick question to all presenters, starting from Professor Murat Yeşiltaş. So, Murat, what do you think is the ideal United Nations according to Turkey, and how can we reach to that goal? I mean, just to, you can summarize what is the ideal UN for Turkey and how?
Thank you, Talha. I think we came at an interesting conclusion in terms of the defining the problem that the United Nations doesn't work at all. In solving the problems, it is not an effective organizations. This is the good news, in terms of the defining the problem. But the bad news is about that. Is it possible to create a new or establish a new international organizations like United Nations? Unfortunately not. So therefore, I think we should find a good answer concerning the questions about the United Nations legitimacy crisis, effectiveness, transparency, and other problems around the United Nations. Here is, I think there is there are alternatives proposal, but of course, with regards to your question, I can summarize Turkey's position. In terms of the main crisis in international system, as I mentioned in the beginning of the panel, Turkey, and as particularly President Erdogan, repeatedly highlight the main problems. So first of all, there is a changing dynamics of global geopolitics. And we have to, as I mentioned, take into consideration the new balance and the new structure of international politics as multipolarity. I think many countries all around the world like the new character of international system as multipolarity. No country except United States doesn't like, the unipolar structure of international politics. So therefore, the geopolitical balance has changed according to Turkey, and we should reform United Nations accordingly. So second point is about Turkey's perception there are crises in which the United Nations should have pioneering role. Unfortunately, United Nations can't play a pioneering role in responding the crisis. There are, transparency problems, accountability, and representation. So I think Turkey's perception is shaped by these broad dynamics. In terms of the principles, Turkey has also, I think, a different perspective when it is compared to the other countries and other proposals. The principles should, according to Turkey, and of course, President Erdogan published a book about this. So therefore, we have a crystal clear understanding about Turkey's position. It is not only based on official statements or other institutional announcement about United Nations criticism. We have a good, I think, official perspective of Turkey within the context of President Erdogan books, which is entitled what a fair world is possible. This is the title of President Erdogan. Number one principle is that United Nations, in order to reform the United Nations, we should have a radical motivations to change the current modalities of the United Nations. The second one is, reform agenda should be very strict and requires a strategic roadmap. So we have been witnessing different proposals since the end of the Cold War, but there was no clear and comprehensive roadmap about the United Nations Security Council, especially in responding how we should United Nations system. So therefore, we need a comprehensive strategic roadmap in terms of defining the strategic objective of United Nations reform. According to the President Erdogan books and Turkey's perspective, the Security Council should be the first target in terms of the reforming United Nations. The third principle is about multilateralism. So the initiative should be based off multilateral understanding of diplomacy and should include all the different parties, including different beliefs, different continents, different culture. And as Ariel González mentioned, should be also include the global South without, excluding any culture, any countries. And the justice, of course, President Erdogan is repeatedly mentioning about the justice of as the central component of United Nations Security Council. In terms of the concrete proposal, when we look at the book and other, evaluation of President Erdogan, United Nations General Assembly should be made much more effective, and he basically proposed United Nations General Assembly as the main decision-making body of the United Nations, whose decision should bind all the members once the decision is taken. And this, I think, structure is a good starting point in terms of recalibrating United Nations General Assembly as the main legislator body. And another point with regards to reforming United Nations is about the veto power. This is one of the main criticisms in the United Nations reform debate. And of course, according to this proposal, veto power must be eradicated in the Security Council, and we should also reformulate United Nations Security Council as a body, which is composing of 5 big powers, and this is not representing the regional dynamics. And of course, it is not possible to from the United Nations Security Council perspective, it's not possible to react and respond to the emergency crisis in different regions. Another point, in addition to the repositioning United Nations General Assembly as the main legislative body, the structure of secretariat should be also reformulated in terms of leading the process, in terms of leading the United Nations role in responding the crisis. So as a conclusion, of course, I mean, Turkey and President Erdogan are not naive in terms of, restructuring United Nations with one proposal. What Turkey needs is that it should also organize its proposal with other countries which have also a reforming agenda. I think this collaboration will make possible United Nations reform as an urgent issue in the international scale. Only Turkey, of course, cannot be successful in reforming United Nations. So therefore, other countries, other rising powers should also be integrated into this by Turkey's proposal.
Thank you very much. Murat, I'm going to now switch to Professor Aylin Ünver. So, Professor, how would the major powers, so Western powers, United States, respond to these calls for change? And would they be willing to accommodate all these expectations? Or is there a major disagreement among especially the Security Council's permanent members? Sesi, microphone.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
One of the panelists already mentioned that, especially recently, the Biden emphasized the need for reform at the United Nations Security Council. That's an important development, which also voiced by the American among the American intellectuals, because previously the Trump administration because of its approach to rule-based international order, not just the international organization that was established right after the Second World War as the outcome of this order, but also the other liberal values. His approach was quite different from the other United States presidents. So when we look at the picture, there is a change in the United States administration attitudes towards the UN Security Council. And it seems that there are a willingness to make those changes in the UN Security Council, which is needed urgently, actually. They're also aware of that, because even the United States, as a strong power militarily and economically, cannot cope with many challenges alone. So it needs multilateralism, like the other global powers, like Russia, like China, and the other nation states in the world. So if we take a look, take into consideration the current General Assembly meeting and what topic they will discuss, sustainable development goals and the climate summit, and even the summit of the future will be held. There is a preparation for all this. So we are talking about the global challenges, global risks that that requires the global reply. So that's why the global powers and the other states needs to come together to cope with those challenges. And so that's why America is aware of that as a country which is affected mostly last year because of the natural disasters caused by the climate changes and global warming. And it was very costly for the American economy. And that's why this is not just an option. This is an urgent action that should be taken now, as the United Nations Secretary General Guterres clearly stated at the summit. So all nations are aware of this reality. We are unfortunately experiencing the threat multiplier effects of the climate change across all the nations in the world. So there is urgent need to take common actions on these issues. So this necessitates the overcome the disagreements and to find a way to compromise and to change their approaches from confrontation to conciliatory approach to take common actions. So, but at the same time, we are witnessing very strange developments. For instance, recently, North Korean president made a visit to Russia. And this is very strange because as you know, that North Korea is a country faced with the United Nations sanctions. And one of the sanctions is ban on the export of aviation. So this visit was totally related to one of this issue. And so this war in Ukraine and the following developments indicates us that there's a change in the world, and it creates a kind of a coalition or alliances between the states who are facing with sanctions. We can include this Iran, Russia, North Korea, maybe later because of China, the support also gave the supports to this country as well. So the UN sanctions imposed to these countries also indicates that it doesn't have the impact that is expected from that, and even it creates alternative formation of coalitions. So this is also risky, and also lessen the impacts of the United Nations on the other side. So these developments also should be followed very seriously, and also make the United Nations again a functioning organization. We need to focus on find a peaceful solution to all these conflicts, and also diminish the already increased geopolitical rivalry or geopolitical struggles among the great powers. Otherwise, all suffer at the end of the day from the common threats we face or we will face in the close near future. So that's why there's an urgent need to make UN Security Council reform to help the United Nations to function properly. And by the way, I'd like to mention that previously, even at the time of the Cold War period, the United States and Russia worked together for the eradication of the smallpox pandemic. So this indicates us that this is possible because when there was a Cold War between these two great powers, they were working together for a common threat that threatened the world. And at the same time, for when the ozone layer problem emerged, and all countries in the world signed the UN treaty, Montreal Protocol, and also it was a big success. And more recently, Turkey played an important role, as you all know, that for the UN brokered grain deal to prevent the food crisis. So these are important examples that shows us there's still hope for the international organizations and all nations, but need leadership for this. Turkey played an important leadership to facilitate the functioning of the United Nations. So we need the increase the number of these leadership. So otherwise, we have to cope with the challenges that we'll face in the future.
So thanks for this optimistic picture and some positive actual examples that, change is possible if there is some urgent, pressing issue or, urgent efforts and leadership. So this demonstrates that we should also be we can still be optimistic about some change. So thank you very much. So Ariel, I know that you were going to leave soon, so I want to ask the question to you. So, is there any efforts, is there any agreement among the Global South about this change? And can they really come up with an alternative agenda? So we know that Turkey has some roadmap, but are there any countries especially in the Latin America, they voice their concerns that are also working on such a reform agenda, or are they willing to lead some of these reforms in cooperation with alternative actors? So what is your overall assessment on this?
Well, thank you. I think there are some old news about the Latin American perspectives on Security Council reform and the broader UN reform. So on one side, Lula has returned to power in Brazil, and this marked really a change, not in the Brazilian position, but in the way how they advance the agenda. So they put the UN reform as a priority, especially because Brazil has a long way commitment to advance and have try to have a permanent seat at the Security Council. So they, I think, reached a kind of success during the last BRICS high-level agenda, because they include in the joint statement support from the rest. They say, for example, that Africa, Asia, and Latin America, including Brazil, India, and South Africa, have to play a greater role in international affairs, and in particular in United Nations, including its Security Council. So on one side, this can include the BRICS plus members that will join this informal fora next year, including Argentina. So Argentina, that traditionally has opposed, we need to deal with this commitment that BRICS arranged previously. So we have Brazil with this idea to establish a permanent seat for Asia, one from Europe, one from Latin America, one from Africa. And on the other side, we have the Brothers for Consensus group that include a broader set of middle powers, including Mexico and Argentina, that they are pushing for broadening the UN, the Security Council, but not based on permanent seat, but on rotative seats for certain members based on regions. So we have this agenda that's, I think, in this United Nations General Assembly meeting won't reach an agreement again, despite some progress during the early this year. And I think this is a reflection of what is going on in world politics. So there are different projects. There are countries that are very pushing for reforming, even if they have clashes. But of course, there are some tensions. For example, Russia historically doesn't want to include Japan and Germany, and even now won't be very eager to do that, especially with the Germans. So at the end, I think that's this degree of agreement among the 5G, the big great powers that have a seat in the United Nations Security Council need more way to develop, because we are in the middle of a kind of proxy war between Russia and the West, and this has very clear consequences to any commitment that the great powers need to deal with global governance.
Thank you very much. So another point of optimism, yes, I mean, despite all these challenges and criticisms, we see that there are some efforts to, reform and find a better, alternative rather than completely abandon the system. So this is also a positive, view from your perspective. So Professor Elfaqih, in your presentation, you mentioned about African Union, Arab League, and OIC. So, of course, these organizations are very important, affecting the politics of the, the MENA region, Muslim world. So, do these, organizations or members of these organizations, do they come up with an agenda, or, can they have a clear voice to transform this system? So, what is the perspective from that, ecosystems or the regions you mentioned?
Yes, certainly they do have a holistic approach, as it has been said, that it is not only the Security Council. The Security Council always come on the forefront when we talk about the reform of the United Nations, but the Arab League and the African Union, and also the OIC, in the past when it was a Congress and now when it was a cooperation organizations, they all call for holistic kind of reform of the United Nations. The African Union long ago has been calling for the kind of reform that will bring development and also restrict the sale of small arms, because that is the reason for almost all the internal conflicts in the continent of 55 members. And also these non-members, also the African Union and the African countries were always not happy with these arrangements of the other 10 non-permanent members of the United Nations, because normally they include 3 African countries. They alternate between sub-regions of the continent. And if we notice or read the record of these non-permanent members, all the issues or the proposals for the resolving wars or creating wars by the United Nations have been introduced through one or two of these non-permanent members at the Security Council. They used them rather than make benefit of their presence or representing the continent that they are coming from. So the Africa Union, they do propose so many changes or so many reforms. I mentioned that the Africa Union is part of the UN system, but it has more effective, on my own readings, a Peace and Security Council than that of the United Nations, because it is elected 15 members alternatively from different regions, and they have the biggest power in the Africa Union commissions. So the commissioner of the Security Council was 15 members, elected 15 members. They are more effective, on my own opinion, because they set the agenda for the whole system of the Africa Union. The Arab League, yes, it has been weak most of the time because of the control of one country or two, because of its financial problems or sometimes financial blessings. It has been inept, but it has always called for the reform of the United Nations because it is part of it. They call for the voting systems. They call for revitalization of the General Assembly. They call for the democratization of the vote of the major hard power agencies or of the United Nations. The Security Council, it is not democratic. The IMF, it is not democratic. The World Bank, it is not democratic. So the dollars equal many countries. One single dollar equal countries. One country of the 5 members equal more than continents. So these issues have always been raised, always been formulated, and as has been said, rather than making an ethical motivated calls, we need to make these radical calls as Turkey is calling for. Radical motivation. We have all to be motivated. All these organizations have to be motivated. They are looking at the United Nations as a system of so many internal institutions, so many internal agencies, and they all need reform. Even the SDGs, we are no longer hearing much about them, and the 2030 is approaching. We are no longer the pandemic stopped almost every serious talk about the SDGs, especially in countries around in Africa and in the Middle East. The democratization, the fourth kind of democratization, which has been the pride of the United Nations when they talk about the democratizations in Africa. And now we are witnessing coup after coup, because the democratizations they brought to Africa, the ambassador of a foreign country, especially from those big 5, is more important than the elected prime minister or the president of the country. And they are showing it. They are not only hiding it or influencing the decision-making in those countries behind the scene, but they are showing it, unfortunately. So this is why Africa is regressing back to military coups and supported by the populations. They are very happy to support or to have military coups in their country because they are fed up of the French rule behind the scene or even in upfront by the increase of military bases of the French, of the Americans, of the British. And these proxy wars they start creating in these countries. People are very much happy about the radical change that taking place because democratization has failed, because the United Nations never really presented a role model in democratization within its own institutions, and a serious and a just and an honest call for democratization in different countries and different regions. But still, the United Nations is needed, as it said. The pandemic showed that yes, we need a common goal. Yes, we need some kind of creative commons through which we can work together. We can reform not only the Security Council, but other agencies. Other agencies has lots of problems. I mentioned only the UNESCO, and how the United States and other countries are influencing the work of a UNESCO, an important institutions like a UNESCO. How the United States tried seriously to affect the work of the WHO, just because the leader of the elected leader of the WHO is not the one they like, or is not from the country that they prefer to have a leader for the organization from themselves. Yes, I mentioned the acquiescence of President Biden to the reform of the United Nations, but that is not guaranteed. It will be changed tomorrow if the Republican came to power. This is why I said we are looking for two Americas in this regard. We are looking for two Washingtons when we are dealing with the United Nations. But thank God, it is not Turkey alone. The 77 plus China call for the reform of the United Nations. The African Union is calling for the reform of the United Nations. The Arab League, the OIC, and many other meetings taken place in the last 2 or 3 years. The last communique always included the reformation of the United Nations. Has to be reformed. Not only the Security Council, but the democratization within, the human rights, even choosing the Secretary General and the leadership of the Secretary General in the United Nations. It has to be reformed. The processes of decision making within the United Nations has to be also reformed. Many countries call for all of that. Many groups and organizations and sub-regional organizations also called for that. And that is also shows the importance of this organization. Despite all of its failures, it is needed. But it is needed with lots of changes, with lots of reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Nazmul, I'm going to give the last word to you, not the least. So we know that there is the South Asia, in terms of world's demography, in terms of world economy, it's a rising region. However, there are some major disagreements among the members of the South Asia. So, can they come up with an agenda? And what is the right way to reflect the point of view of South Asia to this reform agenda? So as all the presenters mentioned that there's an urgent need for reform, and we know that South Asian countries also want some reform. But what is the right way and what is the right strategy that they can work on for this reform?
Thank you again. Indeed, we have a great discussion from all of the scholars. They put their the most important things from different perspectives. So when we're talking like South Asia, I mean, it's not only the South Asia, I mean, the region, especially the Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia, and Far East Asia. This 4 region is quite most important region because of not the regions or demography or population or economy, because of the world powers' new policy in there. I mean, world power, what they are doing in that particular region. So as I talked earlier, I mean, the world powers, especially what we have seen in recent times, USA, France, Germany, even some small states in European Union, they have a specific strategy in that region. It's, of course, it's a good side. I mean, the many particular countries, they are thinking about their policy, about their foreign policy, their security system in there. But unfortunately, as I talked earlier, UN, they are again and again missing this point. I mean, neither they're working with those countries, nor they have their own policy. I mean, it is not important to have their own policy, but they're missing it. So it is quite clear, I mean, they need a reform. I mean, in what way reform is one of the most important question. What I find out when I read those kind of literature regarding this issue, and also by observing the current world system, one thing is very clear: UN is not acknowledging emerging and middle powers. That's one of the most important gap that UN is doing again and again, because they are still living in 2000s, or let's say 2010, or before 2010, or maybe after or immediate after a Cold War. That's the main problem of the UN, because they are not acknowledging what is going on in the world. They are not acknowledging, of course, like, okay, let's say like India, maybe they have some problem. They are doing some thing that is not the way what we are meaning the rule-based international world or rule-based system. But still they have some specific power that have influence in South Asia. Let's talk about the China even. I mean, in terms of Chinese partners or Chinese alliances in there, UN is totally missing that point. Neither they're working with China in the case of, let's say, in the case of Afghanistan. I mean, UN just working independently for their humanitarian aid works. But on the other part, China is trying to do their own independent works. And that looks like China have their another strategy in there. And maybe that strategy would not be good for the South Asia or nor for the world stability. Who knows? I mean, it should be actually, when we are talking, I mean, the UN reform or UN works, it looks like UN totally missing this kind of stuff again and again by not working and integrating with these specific countries. So come up here, I mean, when we're talking the reform system, I mean, we already know that India or China, for example, these both countries, they are representing more than 34% of the population of the world. Even also the Asia-Pacific region, it is now representing more than 44% of the economy. That's a huge, I mean, compared with the all over the world, it looks like there should be more representatives, especially the countries who represent UN, especially in a reform system. It should be from Asia and in the Pacific region. But unfortunately, we know there is only one country, and from the, let's say if we include Russia, then it could be two. So it looks like there is a really imbalance. But again, there is a question. I mean, if UN, I mean, we already understand it, even also I'm sure like all of our speakers here and also who are working on UN reform system so far in the last 15 years, it's very clear UN reform is very urgent and it should to be reformed. But the question is here, let's say like tomorrow, USA, they will think their alliance should to be in the UN reform system. Let's say like the current scenario or current activities of the US, especially in South Asia, like the way they are giving priorities to India, it's very clear it's because of their national interest. And tomorrow, if there is a reform system, it is also looking, I mean, it can be argued though, but it looks like USA may say like, okay, India or Japan or maybe South Korea, they can be in a reform system. So it would be again another debate, like whether or how Russia will see it or how China will do this kind of reform, especially in a security or veto power countries. Let's take example. So what I believe, like rotation is important. Even also the, I mean, let's say this veto power system, maybe it can be removed. Maybe we can say we can offer a new things, like say the whole veto power system can be removed and the new rotation system can be exist in there. And that new rotation system, it can be based on specific capacity and capability that can be included. Let's say like some of our speakers also emphasize on this topic, like the capacity and the capability. It can be cultural capacity. It can be their humanitarian, let's say humanitarian assistance-based capacity, their economic capacity, their security and military capacity. So it can be changed always. I mean, it is not always based on the USA or neither based on the Russia or China. So that's the way maybe we can see much more peaceful world in compared with the exist world system. Because as I said again and again, what is going on in the region, it's not only fixed in South Asia, especially let's take just a simple example. I just want to make it very short. I mean, if we really look at the internal crisis, I mean, in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka, internal crisis in Pakistan, internal crisis in Afghanistan, of course, bigger than more than the internal crisis. Then also currently there is internal crisis in Bangladesh. I mean, internal crisis in Thailand, in Cambodia. It looks like it's totally interrelated with the UN failures because they are really don't have that knowledge the way they need to integrate with the powers who are working in there or in that exist system. So that's why, I mean, the whole reform system demands the political and security-based solutions rather than humanitarian aid, rather than climate or environment. Of course, those are the important things. But here is the most important thing that UN is missing. And for that reasons, people are dying in there. And we are really expecting a bigger conflict. So if we don't do it today, tomorrow maybe it will be so late. And that's what I really understand. I really think about that specific region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we had a really very good discussion here. So I think we come up with the conclusion that, yes, I mean, we still need UN under the circumstances that we have significant challenges. Those challenges can only be addressed with an institution like UN. However, UN needs a serious reform. So some of you may argue that it needs some kind of revolution. And almost all the regions in the world have a different idea about how to reform it. And even among the West, there are major disagreements on the reform. So I think here we need the UN, we need some reform. We have some major disagreements about how to reform the UN. But I think as alternative plans come, I think those plans may come closer to each other. But as you also mentioned that General Assembly is an important venue for discussing. We still have a significant venue to discuss all these alternative plans. So all these gatherings, all these organizations, all these alternative bodies can come together and put all these alternatives in the General Assembly. Still, in terms of, I think the one challenge is the challenge between representation and effectiveness. So I think General Assembly may be the right venue, right process to discuss all these issues. So we still see a lot of hope about this change. But as Aylin also mentioned, we also need some leadership. So this is also very significant in terms of addressing the goals. So thank you for your contributions. I think it's very important. We will continue this topic because this will take the large bodies, large issues can only be, transformed in the longer, I think, process. But I think this is a very good, mental discussion, and this may have significant impacts in other intellectual venues as well. Thank you very much for your contributions, and thanks for the people who follow us at different venues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.